1800s, Phineas Taylor Barnum, better known as P.T. Barnum, became famous as the Great American Showman. Barnum specialized in displaying odd and intriguing attractions to audiences who were eager to pay to see something out of the ordinary. One of the main ways Barnum drew crowds was to exploit abnormalities in human beings. These displays became known as his freak shows. They traveled all around the world, people paid so much money to see all of his freaks, and it should be noted that the term freaks is a very outdated and very offensive term. The only reason why I'm using it in this video is because I'm talking about it historically, but the thing is, these people were simply just people, normal people that had unique traits. Some people were just born with disabilities, had unique talents, but back then people just found them so odd and were willing to pay money to just go and stare at them, essentially. Really messed up, makes me really sad, but like I said, it is a huge part of our history, and today I'm going to be talking about 4 more of these performers, talking about their lives, and talking about how being in these shows actually changed their lives drastically. First, we have Isaac W. Sprague, and he was known as the Living Skeleton. For some reason, Isaac began losing weight at the age of 12, and in 1865, during a visit to a local carnival, a promoter spotted Isaac and offered him a job. Now, at first, he refused this job, but soon he realized that he could probably make a good living capitalizing off of his looks. So he joined a circus sideshow, becoming the Living Skeleton, or also known as the original Thin Man. In less than a year, he auditioned for P.T. Barnum, and he was hired at a salary of $80 a week. By the age of 44, he was 5'6" and only weighed 43 pounds, which is absolutely terrible. He then died at the age of 46, but during his life, he actually got married and had 3 very healthy sons. But yeah, most of his life, he was scary thin, very malnourished, very sick, very weak. It was not very good. Next, we have Joyce Heth, who was known as the 161-year-old woman. The very first human attraction that began P.T. Barnum's career was a woman named Joyce Heth, who he claimed was 161 years old. Now, she was blind, her eyes looked sunken into her head, which really gave her the appearance of being extremely old. She also went on and on about the time she spent being the wet nurse of George Washington, and Barnum wrote in his biography that he paid $1,000 for her, and apparently he said he became her new owner. Keep in mind, this was during the 1830s, so slavery was still legal in the United States. So Barnum took her on a huge tour starting in New York City, and then he traveled all along the East Coast. Now, if you're wondering why people would pay so much money just to see this old woman sitting in a chair, it's because she looked scary old. Like, people believed that she was almost 200 years old. In fact, she looked so old that when newspapers came to see her and write about her, they literally thought she was like a robotic puppet or something because she didn't look real. Now, Joyce died in 1836, and when doctors actually performed an autopsy, they found out that she was only 80 years old when she died. In fact, there was so much speculation about her true age that 1,500 people actually paid money to go and watch her autopsy being done so they could see and hear for themselves how old she actually was. Next, we have Chang and Ang Bunker, and they were known as the original Siamese twins. Twin brothers Chang and Ang were possibly the most famous of all sideshow or freak show performers. They were born conjoined at the chest, and in 1829 they were found swimming in Thailand. This promoter named Robert Hunter paid their parents to basically take them, and the parents gave them the rights to exhibit them as the Siamese twins. Kind of messed up if you ask me. Now, these 2 twins toured with Hunter, and they would do backflips, they would play badminton, they would just shock all of the crowds. After years of performing, they were tired of doing it, they didn't want to perform anymore. They were just done with the show business, so they decided to retire to have a normal life. They bought a house in North Carolina and married 2 sisters, and they actually fathered 21 children between them. The sad thing is, in 1874, Ang awoke to find that his brother Chang had died of a stroke in his sleep. And by the time a doctor arrived to try and separate him, Ang had already died. So that is a super tragic story as well. And lastly, we have the 7 Sutherland sisters. Now, they were adopted daughters of Fletcher Sutherland, and their names were Sarah Victoria Julia, Isabella, Grace, Naomi, Mary, and Dora. And they were trained as a Barnum and Bailey circus musical act with a show-stopping twist. So they would go up on stage, they would all sing together, they had these beautiful voices, and then the sisters would take down their hairdos towards the end of their performance, and their winding brunette tresses would tumble to the floor. Now, apparently it says that all together, the Sutherland sisters had nearly 37 feet of hair. Now, their father realized that their songs could only take them so far because people eventually get bored of hearing the same songs over and over. So he capitalized on their long locks by concocting a 7 Sutherland sisters hair grower. With their circus act providing the free publicity, this hair tonic sold very, very quickly. Apparently, it earned them $90,000 in only their first year of marketing it, and back then that was a crazy amount of money. In fact, hair tonic sales allowed the Sutherland sisters and their legendary mains to retire from the circus, but their empire eventually crumbled at the turn of the century when bobs and other short hairstyles came into vogue. So after that, their hair tonic wasn't selling anymore, but they did already make a ton of money off of it, so I don't really know. Anyways, so guys, those are the 4 performers I'm going to be talking about today. If you would like me to do another video talking about more, I definitely can. I think it is important to get their actual story out there instead of just focusing on what they look like, because they are human beings, they do have a real life story, and yeah, I just think it's really important to talk about this somewhat disturbing history. A freak show is an exhibition of biological rarities, referred to in popular culture as freaks of nature. Typical features would be physically unusual humans, such as those that are uncommonly large or small, those with extraordinary diseases and conditions, and others with performances expected to be shocking to viewers. Heavily tattooed or pierced people have sometimes also been seen in freak shows. Also, performers such as fire-eating and sword-swallowing acts. In the mid-16th century, freak shows became popular pastimes in England. Deformities began to be treated as objects of interest and entertainment, and the crowds flocked to see them exhibited. So like I said, people would literally pay money to go into these circus-like places to view people who had deformities. And the sad thing is, that was sometimes the only way that these people could earn money, because they couldn't get jobs doing normal things because of the way they looked. So let's start with the performer called Ella Harper, and she was known as the Camel Girl. Ella Harper was born with a condition known as genu recurvatum. I hope I'm saying that right. This is a condition that basically has someone's knees hyperextend. So instead of bending the way that we're all used to bending our knees, they bend the other way. And because of the way they bent, it was more comfortable for Ella to walk on all fours, and that is how she earned the name the Camel Girl. So this condition really affected her physical state, obviously, but her mental state was totally normal. She was actually extremely smart, and her plan was that after she made all of this money from the freak shows, she would go off to school, and that is exactly what she did. So this is not really a sad case as much as it is sort of a success story, because she started off being in a freak show and then actually took all that cash and started her education so she could live her life the way she wanted to. But people had never seen a human's knees bend the opposite direction, and that's why she was so intriguing. The next person was called General Tom Thumb. Charles Sherwood Stratton, or better known as General Tom Thumb, is one of the most famous little person sideshow performers in history. Young Charles stopped growing at approximately 2 feet tall. He was actually discovered at the age of 4 years old and was taken into the circus. Imagine being that young, taken into a freak show. That is so young. You haven't even lived any of your life yet. He was in a freak show for 40 years until his death. But apparently he earned a fortune being in a freak show. They're saying like millions of dollars in today's money. And they say he married another little person by the name of Lavinia Warren, and they had a happy life together. So apparently he actually enjoyed being in this line of work. So I mean, if he did, then that's his choice, right? Next we have Frank Lentini, which was a man with 3 legs. So they called him the 3-legged man. Born in Sicily in 18 1981, Francesco Lentini was unique from birth. He not only had an almost entirely complete third leg, but also had a small fourth foot attached to that leg's knee. So he had 3 legs and 4 feet. Now his condition was actually a result of having a conjoined twin at birth. When he was born, the twin that was attached to him actually didn't make it past birth. They had to take that part of the twin off, but they could not remove the other leg part. It's actually a pretty disturbing and sad story if you think about it. He basically still has his twin's leg attached to him. Living his life, he was actually very depressed about his condition. He was a very sad man. He couldn't get over the way he looked. But then he spent a lot of time at a school for disabled children, and he learned to really accept himself at that time, and that's when he went into the freak shows. And he would do these performances where he would like go around kicking a soccer ball with his third leg. He would jump rope with 3 legs, and people were fascinated, and he actually enjoyed that line of work as well. So I guess not all of these people like hated what they did, but I still feel like they were exploited. Next we have Stefan Bobrowski, and he was known as the lion-faced man. Born in 1891 in modern-day Poland, Stefan Bobrowski was an ordinary boy who just happened to have thick hair that grew all over his body. Now, his mother was convinced that the reason why he looked like a lion was because his father was attacked by a lion while she was pregnant with him, so she thought she kind of got cursed because that happened. The sad thing is his mother actually thought he was a monster when she gave birth to him, so she gave him away. What his mother didn't know was he suffered from a condition. This condition is known as hypertrichosis, which is a disorder that gives people what they call werewolf syndrome, where you just grow so much hair all over your body, and sometimes it literally makes you look like a wolf or a lion. The thing is, this man was known for being so gentle and kind and sweet. He had a really great personality. He reportedly spoke 5 different languages, which is amazing. And so his act at the freak show was literally talking a bunch of different languages with different people. He earned so much money from freak shows that he was actually able to retire in his 30s, and he returned back to Europe where he was born, and unfortunately died when he was 41 years old, which is really, really young, but he was a very kind soul. The next person is Annie Jones. She is known as the Bearded Lady. This one definitely reminds me of The Greatest Showman. Annie Jones may not be the original bearded woman, but she was certainly one of the most famous and possibly the youngest. She was born in the 1860s and started doing freak shows when she was only 9 months old. Oh my goodness, I could never do that to my child. That is heartbreaking. Apparently, she was able to grow a full mustache by the time she was 5 years old, and she was one of the most popular acts at the freak show. People even began calling her Monkey Girl, which I find so offensive. And when she got a lot older, she was just known as one of the most famous bearded ladies in history. And what I love is that it says she started using her platform to discourage the use of the word freaks to refer to sideshow performers. So she wanted them to stop being called freak shows because obviously it's offensive, and she really started that movement, which is amazing. The last person we're going to talk about is Myrtle Corbin, and she is a 4-legged lady. Myrtle Corbin, known as the 4-legged girl from Texas, was born with a severe congenital deformity of conjoined twinning that caused her to have 2 separate pelvises and a smaller set of inner legs that she was able to move. So she had like 2 normal sized legs and then 2 like smaller mini sized legs in between them. Apparently, when she was just a month old, her father would take her to her neighbors' houses and they would like pay him to stare at her, which is so weird. And he realized that he started making money to whoever he would show her to. She apparently started performing at freak shows when she was only 13 years old. And by the time she was 18, she had made so much money from freak shows that she retired at 18. She went on to find the love of her life. She got married, she had 5 children, so she actually had a really happy life with a lot of money from the freak show. Perhaps one of the most daring acts a circus had to offer was the human cannonball. Some cannonball daredevils would land safely in a net. Others would land in large bodies of water such as deep ponds or lakes. And the more skilled performers would utilize the cannon in their trapeze acts. Now, contrary to what most people believe, explosives are not used or required for this stunt. Because obviously using explosives would have made this stunt a lot more deadly than it already is. Instead, the cannon acted more like a catapult rather than than a real cannon. When the person was stuffed inside of it, their weight would compress the springs below them, and then when force was added, they would be hurled out of it. They would often use either gunpowder or fireworks or smoke, so it looked like it was a real cannon when the person was like shoved out of it. Now, the first ever person to step inside this cannon to become a human cannonball is not someone that you would expect. It was a 14-year-old girl. Rosa Matilda Richter, otherwise known as Zazzle, was stuffed inside the metallic spring-style cannon and launched into the air in 1877. She flew 20 feet into the air and then landed in a net. And eventually, after doing these performances for a while, she would go 100 feet in the air. My dog is just scratching the carpet profusely. Where are you trying to dig to? I swear there's nothing there. Now, one day, P.T. Barnum saw her perform and he made her an offer that she could not refuse. So she toured with Barnum and his circus through France, across the states. She even ended up marrying his manager. And I just want to know, why does P.T. Barnum find everybody? It kind of creeps me out a little bit. Sadly, in 1891, Rosa Richter was performing with Barnum's circus when she plummeted to the ground. She broke her back immediately and it ended her entire career. She was heartbroken and the accident changed her life physically and emotionally. Like, this girl was so popular until her accident. I mean, it's extremely tragic. Now, this whole act is not just for shock and entertainment. Like I said, it's super dangerous. There are over 30 recorded deaths from people doing this. And it's not from like the launching part, it's from the landing part. Hold on. I'm so sorry. A lot of the times they miss their landing and their entire body just breaks. All right, guys, let's move on to knife throwers and spinning targets. Most of us can agree that if we are hurling projectiles towards a target, it is probably because we are playing a game of darts with friends. However, in the late 19th century, there was a throwing game with a lot more to lose. Their targets were no longer plastic or wood, they were human beings. Now, knife throwers were a huge success. They gathered attention and crowds. People found this act to be absolutely fascinating because it was like a game of chance. You had no idea what you were about to watch. Would it go right? Would it go horribly wrong? People went there to find out, basically. One particular variation of this death-defying act that gained popularity in the early 20th century was none other than the Wheel of Death. The name already, I don't like it. And attached to this wheel were cuffs where you would have to put your hands and your legs, and then the assistant would be put onto this wheel, usually blindfolded to like increase the scare factor. Then the knife thrower would give the wheel a really good spin, so they were going really quickly round and round and round, and then he would perform his knife throwing act, trying to get the knives around this person without hitting them, and sometimes they would be blindfolded too. It is said that this particular spinning death wheel act originated in the United States in 1938 by a husband and wife team working for the Ringling Brothers Circus. Now, surprisingly, very few deaths have happened from doing this. I can't believe that. But there were tons and tons of recorded injuries, obviously, sometimes very serious injuries. But how has barely any deaths occurred? I can't believe that. And then sword swallowing, on the other hand, was a whole other ballgame. YouTube won't even let me show like pictures of this act being performed because it looks so dangerous. But there have been deaths from this because obviously it can cause internal bleeding. Don't swallow swords. All right, next we have tightrope walkers. Tightrope walking has captivated people since the ancient Greeks first began this high-wired show. This skill requires major balance and dedication. And one of the most popular acts was by the Flying Wallandas. The Flying Wallandas were a tight-knit family whose idea of bonding was group tightrope walking. This family of 7 would even like form a pyramid on top of each other as they were walking on one tiny rope. Insane. They often had to wear these flexible leather shoes to like make sure their feet didn't slip easily on the rope, but some people would just go barefooted. I don't know why. Many deaths have occurred from these performances. Most tightrope walking acts you see today are done so with the use of safety netting underneath. However, in the past, back when daredevils really didn't care about their safety, they wouldn't have anything underneath them. Some people would even walk across buildings, over huge bodies of water, canyons, skyscrapers. I mean, the list is endless of what these people would do. Terrifies me. Because obviously any fall would lead right to your death. Then we have lion tamers. circus. Lion tamers have been frightening audiences for over 200 years. Circuses are known for their animal training, their big tents filled with elephants, lions, tigers, seals. And especially back then, people found these animals to be super rare and foreign, and people didn't see them all the time. They only ever saw them at circuses. So they went there for that entertainment factor of not knowing what these beasts were about to do. Lions and tigers were often the biggest victims of circus captivity and exploitation. These animals were made for a life of roaming and hunting, so when they were captured and put into small cages, they became incredibly aggravated. And that is rightfully so. They were literally dragged from where they know is home. Now, in these cages, they became irritable, they weren't fed very well, so they were constantly hungry. And they made them that way so when they were released for this act, they would be super aggressive and it would scare people. The Man vs. Beast Act was highly popularized in the 1920s until the early 1960s. Famous lion tamer Clyde Beatty would put on a captivating show where Beatty would use a bullwhip and chair to distract the lion from his own body as they danced around each other. And also, lion tamers often keep a pistol at their side in case things go wrong, because obviously animals are very unpredictable, but maybe if you didn't put them in cages and starve them, they'd be fine. Sorry, this makes me so angry. Now, thankfully, in today's day and age, there are strict rules about animals in circuses. They have to be kept fed, taken care of. There's all kinds of guidelines now. But if you ask me, they shouldn't be in circuses at all. I find it so difficult to feel bad for any of these tamers who get injured. Like, you put yourself in this position. And lastly, we have flying trapeze artists. It began when a man named Jules Leotard first hung trapeze bars over a swimming pool in his father's gymnasium. Leotard performed as many aerial somersaults and gravity-defying leaps as he wanted, and he felt assured that if he fell, he would just be landing in the water, which is a good way to practice. Well, after mastering this, he moved on to performing at the circus. It proved to be an excellent endeavor as his shows were completely sold out. Unfortunately, this was very short-lasting because he passed away in 1870 just unexpectedly. People believe that he probably had typhoid fever. He did, however, leave behind a lasting legacy. They named skin-tight leotards many acrobats and performance artists wear after him. Now, they say the triple somersault is the most dangerous thing to perform while you're a trapeze artist. It says Italians also named it salto mortale, meaning the deadly leap. Do they really want to do that? Now, broken backs and bones are very common when you're a trapeze artist. Like I said, you have to have netting and you have to be very balanced and just good at what you do. In 1725, a hunting party stumbled upon a young boy in northern Germany's Herzwald forest. And although his specific age was unknown, they thought that he was to be around 12 years old. Now, the boy was alone in this forest and appeared to have been living there for some time, surviving on a diet of plants, nuts, and acorns. They say this boy had long matted hair, he had long fingernails, his skin was sunburned. The hunters literally described him as filthy and nude, and he seemed completely unable to speak. He apparently only communicated using a variety of grunts and squeaks. So they said he sounded like an animal and he even sort of looked like an animal. Although he could not walk upright, he was very good at climbing trees and navigating through the forest on all fours. The locals even complained that occasionally he would wander into the town and he would pick pockets, he would steal food, and apparently he would try to kiss a lot of the ladies in the town. Locals speculated the boy was abandoned in the forest as a baby and was raised by wild animals. There was even rumors suggesting that he was mothered by a bear, a wild boar, or a wolf. Although none of these animals were present in the forest when they found him, he was just by himself. Now, after he was found, the locals started to pay more attention to him. They were really intrigued by him and his story, so they began to call him Peter the Wild Boy. They also even launched this effort to try and find his family, but despite their best efforts, they were never able to find anyone who knew him or was related to him. It was literally like his family just vanished off the face of the earth. So no one really knew what happened to him or why he was alone. I mean, he was 12 years old and looked like he was there since he was a baby. Stories about this wild boy eventually reached the ears of Great Britain's King George I, who was just so fascinated fascinated by his story and wanted the boy to be brought to his palace. So King George's daughter-in-law, Princess Caroline of Wales, arranged for Peter to be brought to Kensington Palace. Now, at first he was kept as this sort of strange and entertaining kind of pet for all of the royals, which, yes, that is super messed up. He's still a human and should not be treated as a pet. But people still say that Peter was treated kindly regardless. Apparently the entire time he was in their care, he was happy. Now, as expected, Peter faced a lot of hardships with this new life. He had to adapt to all the changes and being with royals, which meant that he had to act royal. Although he was expected to use utensils, he preferred to eat with his hands. He also resisted wearing any clothing. He always wanted to be nude. And he seemed more comfortable to sleep on the floor rather than his bed, which was provided to him. Princess Caroline hired Dr. Arbuthnot to arrange Peter's education and help him develop social skills. She also hired this large group of servants that were only dedicated to caring for Peter, to make sure that he had daily care, to make sure that he was disciplined. They were trying to transform him from a pet to like a normal man. Peter eventually learned to walk upright and seemed to enjoy his new life. They say he especially enjoyed listening to music, and he got really close with a lot of the king's staff. The boy was even christened and baptized in 1726, and he was a beloved member of their household until King George I's death. Following the death of King George I in 1727, Peter was passed from home to home until he was taken in by a farmer named James Fenn. Peter ran away from Fenn's farm in 1751 and was arrested in Norwich, where they actually mistook him for a homeless man. They just saw this scruffy, strange man walking around and thought that he was up to no good. And as he could not verbally communicate and they were unable to verify his identity, authorities sent him to a correctional institution called the Bridewell. So James Fenn had to place all of these advertisements in newspapers pleading for Peter to be returned to him, and he was eventually reunited with him after months and months of his capture. So to prevent similar issues in the future, Peter was forced to wear a brass collar engraved with his address and identifying information. Now, there's actually pictures of this real collar. They kept it to put in museums, and it looks so uncomfortable and heavy, and this really makes him look like a pet because dogs wear collars, you know? Like, imagine wearing that around your neck for the rest of your life. Like, I get they were trying to keep him from getting lost and whatnot, but it's not ethical. So Peter lived with James Fenn until he too died, and then he went to live with another farmer named Brill. Although he had a history of running away from home, Peter developed a strong relationship with Brill and never ran away while in his care. Now, according to the legend, Peter refused to eat after Brill's death, and he essentially starved himself to death. Peter died in 1785 at the age of 73, and he is buried at St. Mary's North Church. And you can actually still go there and see his gravestone, although it's really degrading, it's super old, and the pictures that I see, there's like grass and plants growing all over it. Now, researchers that look back on this story of Peter think that he was actually disabled. Peter's behavior and inability to verbally communicate were assumed to be caused by his time living in the wilderness. However, researchers disagree with this, because back in the 1700s, it was not uncommon for parents to actually abandon their children if they were physically or mentally impaired. The infants or small children were simply left in the woods or other secluded areas where they would ultimately die of exposure to the elements or starvation. So it's unclear as to why exactly Peter was abandoned by his parents, whether it was on purpose or by accident. However, historians believe Peter's appearance, behavior, and inability to verbally communicate indicate that he had something called Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. Apparently, this is a genetic disorder that is similar to autism. It causes developmental delays, physical abnormalities, hooded eyes, fused fingers or toes, or the limited or no ability to talk or communicate. There's a portrait of Peter which was painted by William Kent that suggested he had many of the physical attributes and behaviors associated with this condition. Alright, Alright, so the story about Edward Mordrake is sort of an urban legend that has been freaking people out around the world for hundreds of years. People aren't really sure if this story is true or if it's false. So I'm gonna tell it to you and you guys can decide for yourselves. So people call Edward Mordrake the man with two faces. He was born in the 1800s and people describe him as being young, intelligent, and a very good-looking English nobleman. So when you looked at him straight on, he had a really great-looking face, he looked like a friendly person, but when he turned his head around, that's when something else was there. With all of his blessings came a terrible curse. So in addition to his handsome face, he also had a terrifying disfigurement, which was a face on the back of his head. What was strange is that people called this face on the back of his head a beautiful girl. They also described the face as being as lovely as a dream, but as hideous as a devil, which is a very strange combination. I feel like those words almost like contradict each other. And the other strange thing is that if you go back in history, some people say the face looked like a woman and other people say it definitely looked like a man's face. So which one was it? We don't really know. Now, the face that he had on the back of his head was both intelligent and awful to him. Whenever Edward Mordrake would cry, his second face would smile and sneer at him. So it would literally make fun of him whenever he was sad or was crying, which must have been awful. Imagine crying or having a bad day and you literally have laughing at the back of your head. So as you can imagine, Edward was absolutely tormented by this. It would keep him up all night long saying terrible things to him. The things this face would say, Edward couldn't even repeat to him. That's how bad they were. So this poor guy could not get any sleep. He was tired all the time and every day he was getting more and more sad. So he was eventually driven mad and unfortunately died at the age of 22. That is so young, 22 years old. Now it gets creepier. He left a note behind asking for the face to be destroyed after he died. His note literally said, "Lest it continue its dreadful whispering in my grave." So he did not want to be buried in the ground with this second face still attached to him. Imagine being even tormented in death. I mean, this is such a dark story that this guy had to go through. But I can't imagine living with something else talking behind me constantly. Of course it would drive me insane. You would never be completely alone or in silence. Literally anybody would go mad with that. Now, that story probably sounds super fake, right? Like there's no way that could be true. But in 1896, famous American doctors named George M. Gold and Walter L. Pyle included Edward Mordrake's story in their book called Anomalies and Curiosities of Medicine. And this book was basically filled with peculiar medical cases that people had never seen before, especially back in the 1800s when medical care wasn't that great. They would put all of their strange cases, like people who would go to freak shows, into this book. Now, these doctors were super credible and highly successful back in the 1800s. They were amazing in their medical practices and everything they put in their book was true. So because Edward Mordrake's case was in their book, people thought it must be real. Actual doctors are saying it was real. So as you can kind of imagine, that makes it super confusing. Well, in 2018, a photo supposedly depicting the remains of Mordrake's head went viral on the internet. People saw this picture and thought it was the actual head of Edward Mordrake with the tiny face on the back. People freaked out. They were like, "See, we told you it was true." But then scientists did some research and found out that this head was actually fake. It's just paper mache made by an artist who was trying to make what would have looked like Edward Mordrake's head. So this artist came forward and said, "Hey guys, this is just for entertainment purposes only. This isn't actually the guy's head." So once again, people were like, oh, then maybe it's not actually true. There's also a famous photograph that I've been showing that people have said is actually Edward Mordrake, but even this is done in wax and isn't actually the real photograph of him, especially because he was from the 1800s. You wouldn't get a photograph that looked like this. So my question to you guys is, do you think that Edward Mordrake actually existed? Do you think that someone could actually have a normal functioning talking face at the back of their head that could torment them. What's interesting is that American Horror Story actually included Edward Mordrake's story in one of their seasons called Freak Show. They did change up his story a little bit though to make it more American Horror Story-esque. In the show, Edward Mordrake's face did drive him insane, but then he was put into an insane asylum and then eventually joined a freak show where he felt more comfortable. Everything was going fine, but then one Halloween night at this freak show, the face at the back of his head told him to kill all of his circus members. So he did, and from that day forward, this whole legend came to be that no freak show should have a performance on Halloween night or Edward Mordrake would come and get them. So that's sort of the whole storyline in the American Horror Story show. It was kind of pretty interesting. But this whole Edward Mordrake story actually reminds me of this creepy urban legend that you kind of had in schools growing up, where teachers would say they had eyes at the back of their heads. Like, you know how they would be like,
"You better behave because I have eyes at the back of my head, and even when my back is turned, I can see what you're doing."
And that legitimately scared me when I was little, and I felt like it kind of had some truth to it because for some reason they would always know what the kids were doing even if they weren't looking. I remember one time my teacher was writing on the chalkboard, so their back was turned to the class, and this kid at the very back of the class was making the loser sign at my teacher, and he was making no noise whatsoever. And my teacher flung around and was like,
"Didn't I tell you I had eyes at the back of my head? I know what you're doing. I see the loser sign."
It was so scary, but I don't know guys, maybe teachers do have eyes at the back of their head and they have like magical powers, so don't underestimate them. We're gonna be talking about phenomenons around the world, which I know you guys love, but we're gonna be starting off with the green children. Now, we've talked about black-eyed children, children on milk cartons, ghost children. We've talked about a lot of children, but today we're going that one step farther because they are green, ladies and gentlemen. The green children were two children who suddenly appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, UK in the 12th century. So this happened quite a long time ago. So imagine this in your mind right now. You're chilling in the town doing your daily routine, and suddenly these two kids just walk through the town with green colored skin. These children happen to be brother and sister. Their appearance was normal in all other areas. They looked human physically. It's just that their skin shone with this bright green. Now, the creepier part is that they started speaking an unrecognized language. It was something no one had ever heard before. And something else that was weird was that they refused to eat any of the food the townspeople were offering them. Because these people were worried about these children, like where's their parents? Why are they here by themselves? Why do they look so sickly in appearance? The only thing they wanted to eat was beans right out of the ground. So these people watched as these two green children went over to the field full of beans in the ground and literally stuck their mouths into the soil and started eating the beans. After living with these townspeople for a couple years, they finally began to eat real food. And as they ate real food, their green skin color slowly faded away. They were taught English, and eventually they were able to give an explanation as to how they appeared in the town and why they were green. They explained that they came from the land of Saint Martin, which they described as a very, very dark place because the sun never rose past the horizon. They claimed the entire town was inhabited by green people. They said the day they arrived in this new town, they were tending their father's herd when suddenly they saw this bright beam of light. Along with the light, they heard the sound of loud bells ringing. So they basically followed this light and the bells, and it led them to this town in the UK. So obviously when they heard this explanation, they were totally baffled. I mean, it sounded absolutely crazy. There are some theories about who these children were. Some people say that they were Hollow Earth children, or parallel dimension children, or maybe even extraterrestrial children. People just thought they couldn't have been of this world. The way they were describing where they were from, it sounded like a whole other planet. Now, there is a logical theory that does go with this story. Some people say they were suffering from hypochromic anemia. Basically, the condition is caused by a very poor diet, so you're not getting enough of the foods you need for your body, and that would affect the color of your red blood cells, changing your skin to a greenish tone. So the logical explanation would just be that they were malnourished, but some people say no, they were definitely not of this world. And what's creepy is that their case is not the first time that ever happened. There are multiple accounts of green children throughout history that have showed up in different places around the world. And most people are afraid of them because there's something they don't understand. And what's even creepier is that there are tons of historical writings of people saying do not let them in your house and do not communicate with them. Like, there's so many warnings because people really feared them, and honestly, it's a pretty spooky story. So let me know your thoughts on the green children down below. And now we're gonna move on to the next phenomenon. Our next story is about a gorilla named Coco that had very deep conversations with people. And you might think, Jessii, gorillas don't talk. No, she was actually taught sign language, so she was able to communicate with different people about what was going on in her mind, which not many animals get a chance to do. And one day, Coco had a conversation with one of her caregivers about death. And this conversation really surprised them. What happened was this caregiver brought out a fake skeleton and showed it to Coco and said, "Is he alive or dead?" And Coco signed, "He is dead." And then the caregiver asked, "Where do animals go when they die?" And Coco said, "They go to a comfortable hole in the ground." And that absolutely stunned them because they had never spoken to Coco about what happens when you die or what death even is. And it just shows how smart Coco was and actually knows like the concept of death. It was crazy. All right, let's move on to the next phenomena. This is the unsolved mystery of the spaceman photo. When Jim Templeton took some photographs of his 5-year-old daughter in the summer of 1964, he did not realize that this one photograph would gain worldwide attention. The photograph contained a picture of his daughter, like he expected, but it also came with what looked like a spaceman standing behind her. And according to her father, there was nobody around when this photo was taken. Since then, a number of theories have been formed about this photograph. Like, there has been logical explanations like, oh, maybe someone just happened to walk by while you were taking it. Other people say it's a sign that there's life beyond Earth. Some people say it's something paranormal. Scientists have never been able to prove that this photo was fake. And especially because in 1964, people didn't have the editing tools for photographs like we do now. So that makes it even more believable, but let me know what you think. Next, we have a painting of a UFO from the 15th century. This painting is called Madonna with Saint Giovanni, and this painting has been the center of a debate for years and years, like hundreds of years. Ancient alien theorists believe there is a clear UFO in the background of the sky. And what's creepy is that other historical paintings around this time also have depicted strange objects in the sky. So alien theorists are saying that aliens have been coming to our planet and interacting with humans for millennia. So maybe back during this time, they showed up more often? I mean, what do you guys think? The fact that there are multiple paintings showing what looks like UFOs is kind of unsettling. Next, we have Eternal Flames Falls. Now, I'm excited about this because this phenomenon is not too far from where I live. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would take me like 5 hours to drive there, but it's not like it's across the world, so I kind of want to go here now. At the heart of this waterfall, there is a small flickering flame that is caused by a natural gas pocket. And people literally travel here and hike around this waterfall to view this ongoing fire behind the water. It's apparently a very strange vibe and sight while you're standing there. It almost seems magical, and that's why there actually are so many legends surrounding this forest. So many people have had sightings of elves in this forest. There have been other unknown, unnatural creatures that have been spotted there as well. The falls just kind of remain a mystery to science and to everybody. And I honestly think it would be so cool to go visit, but they do say that you cannot go off the hiking trail because apparently the trail gets really dangerous and so many people have fallen off cliffs and have had really terrible accidents, have gone missing, so stay on the trail if you're going there. Next, we have the Hook Island sea monster. While on a boat trip with his family in the summer of 1964, Robert Lee Surrick saw a creature in the Australian waters that appeared monster-like in size. So he took this photograph, which has become extremely famous. Once again, this was back in 1964 when not a lot of people had the ability to easily edit photos this well. The creature is described as being 80 feet in length. It has serpent-like features and eyes on the top of its head. The creature quickly became known as the Hook Island monster. Some people have debunked this photograph and theory, but this legend still lives on and you'd be surprised at how many people actually do believe this. Okay, we have one more interesting fact before we go. I'm going to show you the darkest substance in the universe. This is the darkest color black that has ever been created. It is called Vanta Black, and even looking at it through your computer screen, you're not seeing the true blackness of it because the screen changes the color a little bit. Vanta Black is a nanomaterial that is darker than any other substance on Earth. It was developed in the UK by Surrey Nanosystems in 2015 and is actually a collection of vertical carbon tubes that are grown on a substrate. There's a lot of scientific words in there, but like I'm kind of understanding. Vanta Black absorbs 99.98% of the light that hits its surface. This means that the human eye technically sees nothing when it looks at Vanta Black, making it the closest thing to staring at a black hole. That is so creepy to me. And even looking at the photograph, even though it's not what it looks like in real life, it still looks really, really dark, so that's spooky. The Sandown Clown is a strange being that was encountered by two young children vacationing at Lake Common in Sandown in May of 1973. As they were hanging out there, the two children started to hear what sounded like an ambulance siren in the forest. So because they were curious, the children began to follow it. They wandered across a bridge over a stream where they met with a curious, unidentifiable being that has often been described as a cross between a clown, a robot, and an alien. And guys, this is not an urban legend. Like, this is an actual report of what happened to these two kids. They said it was this shy but friendly being, and it spoke very kindly to the children for about half an hour before they returned back to their parents. And then it seemed to just seemingly vanish after their interaction. No one had ever seen it again. So this is said to be one of the strangest alien encounters ever recorded, like I said. So let's talk about this clown alien's appearance and mannerisms. For some reason, this style of video where we're talking about like a creature really reminds me of the Trevor Henderson videos I used to make, where I just talk about like their appearance and like what they do. So despite being over 2 meters in height, the Sandown Clown has more or less human proportions. So like it has 2 arms, it has 2 legs, it has a round head with identifiable features. But the similarities between a normal human and there. Because the being's head was described as being too large for its thin frame and shaped like a nearly perfect sphere. Its skin was very white and had the consistency of paper, while its hands and feet possessed only 3 fingers and toes each. And its face seemed to have been crudely painted onto the surface of its head. The 2 blue triangles seemingly represented eyes, while a flat brown rectangle served for a nose, and its mouth had thin yellow lips shaped like an oval. And what's creepy is that as this thing spoke to the children for half an hour, its mouth didn't move. It was just speaking, but like the mouth movements were not there. Its hair hung down beneath its hat and it was kind of like frizzled, and 2 wooden antennae stuck out from the side of his head. It seemed to be wearing some type of clown costume, which consisted of a tall pointed hat with a black knob or bauble at the top and a high collared suit of red and green. It wore these dark blue gloves, but its feet were bare. The suit's trousers and sleeves were long long and frilly, and the kids weren't sure if these wooden antennae were a part of the costume outfit or if it actually was coming out of his head, like they might have actually been a part of his body. It was also carrying a microphone through which it spoke, and which is believed to be the source of the ambulance-like siren heard by the children. So through this microphone, this creature was literally luring the kids into the woods by making ambulance noises. It lived in a 2-story hut or shack in a wooded area close to the lake, whose walls were papered with blue-green patterns and whose floors were metallic. And apparently this hut also contained like all wooden furniture, which is so crazy. And like I said, the demeanor of this clown creature alien seemed very shy but friendly, and it actually told the children that it was frightened by humans. And he also said that he would not defend himself if he was ever attacked or caught, which I find really weird. It's like he would just sort of accept what's happening to him. It claimed to drink water from the stream after cleaning it and gathered wild berries, and he would eat these berries in such a weird way. The kids say that he would thrust his head forward, would put the berries into his eyes, the berries would move back and forth between his eyes before they went down into his mouth where he swallowed them. Excuse me? This could be because his mouth doesn't move, so like he has to use his eyes as his mouth. So weird. Apparently it could write in English using a pen and paper. The little girl asked what his name was. He said his name was Sam, so he didn't have any crazy name. It was pretty normal. And he also told the little girl that he was all colors, whatever that means. They asked him if he was human. He said he was not. So they asked him if he was a ghost, and he replied with, well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way. So people have been studying this case forever. Scientists are baffled by it, people are baffled by it, the authorities are baffled by it, and so people have come up with so many different explanations. So let's go through them. The first explanation is that maybe it was just a human wearing a costume, which it definitely could have been. Some people think it was either a fairy, a ghost, or other type of paranormal or supernatural creature, which it also could have been. Some people say it was a robot. Other people say it was an extraterrestrial, so it was an alien on Earth just hanging around for a bit. Others say it was a hoax because yes, some people do make things up just to be in the newspaper. Or it could have been a shared hallucination, which is a very rare thing to occur when both people can see the same thing but they're hallucinating. The children insisted that this event actually occurred for the rest of their lives. So it wasn't like they were kids and they were making things up, being, you know, using their imagination or whatever. When they got older, they still said, no, this actually happened. We weren't making it up. We weren't messing around. And so yeah, this encounter has been logged in the archives and people are just baffled by it. So let me know down below what you guys think of this. Do you think there's a rational explanation, or do you think they actually saw an alien clown thing? I like to think it's real because I think that would be so cool if it was, because it sounds friendly. It sounds really nice. So like, I'm not intimidated by it or anything.